Hi, I'm Sean in St. Louis, and welcome to the Marketing Gateway. And today we're going to hear from my good friend and longtime colleague, Ed Lahue, who has an incredible marketing career that he's going to talk about in a lot of detail with a lot of the insights and knowledge and experiences that he's had along the way. But just to give you a sense of what you're in for, this is a guy who has worked in consumer packaged goods, building products that you've actually heard of and getting them ready for launch. He's a guy who worked in consulting, helping companies to plan and execute marketing strategies. And he worked in the healthcare industry for a while, which is where I intersected with him before then going into counseling small businesses to help them to be successful at the startup stage. And now he's actually teaching at Washington University in St. Louis to help people who are scientists and engineers who have never really had an opportunity to learn about marketing, to think about how to take a product that they're developing and turn it into something that actually might be a viable marketplace product. So you're going to get a lot out of this. And in fact, there's so much that we split it into two parts. So we're going to learn today about Ed's background. And then in our second segment, which will go live next week, you will learn more about his life in healthcare and consulting with small businesses. So enjoy. I would like to welcome Ed Lahue to the Marketing Gateway. Ed, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And it's such a pleasure. We've worked together so much in years past when you were back at SSM Health. And I'm glad we've been able to keep in touch during all the things you've been doing since. And I'm so delighted to have you on the program because you have such a wealth of knowledge and experience that it's going to be a treat for all of our listeners. So thank you.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm excited about doing it.
Likewise. Well, I'll tell you, let's just get started. We're going to jump right in. Okay. Tell me something surprising that I don't know. And it could be anything that you'd like to share.
Well, I guess the one unique thing was I grew up, I was a small child in Japan. My dad was in the Air Force there. And I don't talk about that a lot, but I think it was a blessing because it kind of helped me get a global perspective. And later I did global marketing actually in Asia and places like that. So, I think when you kind of grow up in one area, you kind of get a little myopic. But we moved around a couple of places. But he retired though when I was 8, so I got to grow up in one location, primarily St. Louis. So we'll talk about that later.
Well, growing up abroad always gives you a chance to see the world a little bit differently. And I grew up in a military community. I never got to live anywhere fun, but I had friends that lived in Japan or Germany or all over the world. And I just find that it really gives you a head start on life. So it's a cool experience to have. Well, in this series on the Marketing Gateway, we're really focused on St. Louis area, like you were saying. So tell me how you came to live and work here in the St. Louis area.
Well, when my dad retired from the Air Force, my mom was from Collinsville. So when he retired, we moved 3 blocks from where she was born. So he took her all over the world twice and ended up back there. So I pretty much from 8 years old all the way through. And then I went to SIU Edwardsville, got my undergrad in business, and then did my MBA there, mostly part-time. And then we lived in Edwardsville when we first got married. I was a sales rep selling dial soap to retailers.
That's fantastic. And, Collinsville's just up the road from where I live in the Metro East. So know it well. And the Italian festival, that they do every year. And
yes.
It's fantastic. Well, I always tell people the Metro East is the kind of hidden gem of the St. Louis area because it's a bargain to live there. It's close to everything. And, if you get tired of the city, you can drive out to the cornfields. They're not that far away.
That's right.
Well, what's something about the St. Louis area that you wish other people knew?
Well, it's funny you made that comment. I think that's probably one of the things growing up in the Metro East. And then now I live actually in Jefferson County. That most people don't know that you can be in a nice suburb or even a rural area and only be, 20 to 30 minutes from downtown. We lived in Edwardsville and people thought that I lived out in the, cornfields. Now there were some cornfields just down, not very far from me, but the reality was we only lived 25 minutes to downtown. And now we're like 35 minutes from downtown and we're actually in Jefferson County. And it's actually a hilly area. If you were on my deck and squinted, you think you're in the Ozarks. But we're only 35 minutes from downtown. And I think a lot of people, if they're not from St. Louis, they think of the city of St. Louis, which is fine, but there's a lot more to St. Louis than that.
That's definitely for sure. And, when you go up to Chicago or some of the other large cities within driving distance, the city spreads out really far. And
Yes.
Chicago, like all of the cornfields that used to be near it are all suburbs now. So
Yes, exactly.
I think St. Louis is definitely different that way. You don't have to go far.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's transition a little bit to talk about your background in marketing
Hmm.
because again, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show as one of our marketing mentors is because you have done so much, and we have talked many times about all the things you've done.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background in marketing, where you started, some of the brands you've worked for, and some of the accomplishments that you've made over the years.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to condense that, but yeah, I have about a 40-year career. I started out as a sales rep and I really snuck into marketing. Because back in those days, you really were not. In fact, I was the first one at Dial to actually go from sales to marketing. Nobody else had done that. Now they would have loved it if I would have been a sales rep, went and got my MBA full time at a well-known MBA school at the time. Now SIU Edwardsville actually is one of those, but when I was there, it was a little unknown. Um, but yeah, I really wanted that practical experience. What really helped me was scanners were invented. So the key thing that helped my career was the retailers had more information than the manufacturers. So the pendulum of power really shifted to the retailer. So when I first was in marketing, I was an entry level like product assistant, and I had directors and managers lined up in my office waiting to talk to me and ask me, "Hey, would this work with the retail trade?" So it ended up being a benefit, but in the beginning, actually, it was a little bit of a. They were like, "Oh, you can't do that." People were told, "No one's ever done that." Well, tell me if no one's ever done that, that's a challenge for me. Um, so I went to Phoenix, which is why we left St. Louis initially, back in 1987 and started out as a product assistant. So I was the entry level, just like any other MBA grad. But I had already had 4.5 years experience and actually worked on the Purex laundry detergent business, which was very trade driven. And interesting conversations I would have some of the sales force. They didn't know they just thought I came from, Duke University. And I quickly, after they went through their spiel, I said, "Hey, just so you know, I just left the field." All of a sudden there's this long pause and they're backpedaling. "Well, that's not really what I meant to say." And so they knew that I knew what was going on. But we got in bed with a little company back then in Arkansas called Walmart. You may have heard of them now, but they
Hmm.
were still a pretty new company. Kmart was kind of the big player. But yeah, I learned about marketing is not just about, putting stuff out there. It was about, can we make money at this? And what is the margin? So we were a high volume, low margin business. We had 4 detergent plants, one here in St. Louis, actually. And so I learned about how, volume cancels all sins. And really, that's why I brushed up on my variable costs, fixed costs, which really helped me as a product manager. But yeah, I always wanted to be a brand manager, but I found that I got bored because these were large businesses, and they're not like let some 30-year-old kid make a bunch of changes. A lot of times we felt like we were taking last year's marketing plan and kind of, you know, rearrange the deck chairs, as we used to call it sometime. So I gravitated to more of the innovation world, doing new product development. And I like that because it was heavy on the market research. I was always fascinated about consumers, any customers, and understanding how they tick and what drives them. And so I got involved with new product development. Even prior to leaving Dial, I was supposed to launch a new product, and we had some issues with a plant in California, and I won't go into the details, but I couldn't get a permit for my new product. And then by the time that we wanted to get back to the Midwest, we really missed. Phoenix was great. I would have probably stayed there if it wasn't for family being in St. Louis. It was just too far. You pretty much had to fly. It's a 24-hour drive. That's without stopping. So some people could take 3 days to do it. So we ended up at Borden in Columbus, Ohio. Our 2 daughters were born there. And I worked on the cheese and culture products. And really, that's where I did the bulk of my time, new product development. This is also where I learned how big companies don't always pay attention to the market research. I was shocked to find that, products were launched that should have been. So a lot of my job was, I hate to call it, but I was a little bit of fix or flush. So I was working on products that I had to decide, can I reposition this product another way that would be successful? or do I need to just kill it? So I got pretty good at doing that, which I think, again, grew my career into thinking about these more as a business and not just marketing from a standpoint of a lot of people think of the 4 Ps, and they heavy on the promotion side. But the reality is it's more about the business model. And, is there a customer here for this? Is we really having a product that fills a need? And who is that customer, and how many actually will give us money for this? And how do we offer value? And I always talk about value proposition in terms of how you solving the problem in a better way that's going to change behavior. Because what I learned quickly was that behavior change, people get into a routine, they've been using the same product for a long time. And for them to change, it's like, yeah, that sounds like it's a better option, but I'm going to just stick with what I got. So there I actually did create a bunch of new products. We launched a product called the Big Cheese, which was a simple concept. It was like, if you look at processed cheese, it doesn't cover the bread. So a simple concept was, well, we'll make a product that covers the bread. The market research folks were kind of dumbfounded that it scored so high that they actually tested it twice. And it still scored high. And I also created a product for a premium product. One of the concepts, again, learn heavy that, not consumers, just even if consumers don't believe it, even if it's true, if they don't believe it, it doesn't matter, right? So a simple example was Kraft singles. Many households think that's cheese. So we have a premium product that's actually a higher cheese content. So how could you have more cheese than cheese? Is the way I described that product. So Kraft was actually talking about 5 ounces of milk. So I ran to R&D and said, how much milk is in our product, in this premium product? Well, it turns out there was 6 ounces of milk versus their 5 ounces of milk. So my wife actually helped me name the product More Milk Singles. We brought Elsie back to television, or she'd never been on television, frankly. She was, back when television was invented, the board didn't know what to do with her. So they kind of didn't do anything with her. So we actually revived her and created one of the first commercials using this was before computers were really state of the art today. Now you just, press a couple keys and you do this. We actually had to shoot commercials live, and then we had animation and you blended them together. So very expensive production back in the early 90s.
And that's Elsie the Board and Cow, right?
Yeah, Elsie the Board and Cow. So I created a whole line for kids. I had things like bubblegum tape. I had cheese tape. Well, the problem was the company was financially not doing well. So I found out, I had spent all this money getting the product ready or getting the concept ready. And they told me they don't have any money. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any money? Like, why have you working on this? And that's where I learned really quickly that you have to have, it's all about objectives, strategy, and action. And those have to be aligned with resources. So if you don't have alignment with the organization, so I actually revised the new product development strategy, which is where the Big Cheese idea came from. Well, we actually had some pizza flavored cheese that was for kids. So I took that flavoring and put it into Big Cheese, and it was like a nacho flavor. We also had dinosaurs and bears, but they kept breaking as they fell down through the same line that made shredded cheese. And so anyway, I needed new equipment. We actually did a pilot test. It's the same way you make dog biscuits, where you have these huge cylinders. One has a cavity, one solid. And you run those through there. So we actually tested it on a small scale and got it to work. But we needed to reinforce the floor because these cylinders are huge. They would be as big as your house, And so long story short was I needed $5 million of capital. They said we don't need money. So I took my resume on the street. And with 3 job offers later, I went to work for Bristol Myers Squibb in Evansville, Indiana. And that's really where I ran the Gerber baby formula business. It was a licensing agreement with Gerber. And that's where I really learned about CRM and doing database marketing, because that's how infant formula is marketed. Because, you're only talking about 4% of households have a child, but 2% are on the WIC program, and they're essentially getting it for free. Or it's paid by the government program, which was very successful in helping, with babies at a young age. But so we only had 2% of households. So I was constantly arguing with J. Walter Thompson, why are we spending $25 million on television when there's only 2% of households? So, but within 6 weeks of the job, I actually recommended to get out of the business. So I had to slowly kill the product. I guess it's okay to talk about this now, since it's like, we're 30 years later. So I had to slowly kill the product over a 4-year period because we just renewed the licensing agreement and we didn't want to just hand it over to Gerber. So I actually, so that's one of the things in my resume is how to kill a product over a 4-year period and make as much money as you possibly can. But what I did was I took all that money we made and I started doing new product development. The company had not done much in new product development. And I created Infamil singles, which is a single serve for one bottle at a time. I did the Infamil AR, which stands for added regurgitation or added rice. We did market research and found out that moms were actually making the bottle bigger, the nipple bigger on purpose, and putting rice cereal in there to make the baby not, basically we call projectile vomiting. It's like literally if you've had a baby in the back seat, in a car seat, they could literally coat the front seat, the back of the front seat. And so we actually like, hey, if you can't beat them, let's join them. It's that kind of thing. So it's this whole thing of understanding the consumer. And so we actually put it in there which made it much more safer. And then I also did the early development for ARA and DHA fatty acids. It's found in the breast milk. So our goal was always trying to figure out how do we make infant formula closer to breast milk. Let's see. And I did also we had a whole line of products for diabetes. We had a resistant starch that we had clinical trials on so I actually did a lot of work and created a whole consumer model. And what I learned from that whole process was, we really should be spending more of our time in problem definition, not product development, not concept development. You spend more of your time in that understanding the consumer or the customer, and then taking that and then building on that. Then you do your ideation and your product development. So all of those things really led me to, all my career was always a transition. So then Bristol Myers Squibb went through a lot of changes, and I know I'm not listing all the things I worked on because I can't remember them all now. Because I was also involved with the Infamil. I also redid the packaging rebranding for the whole Infamil family of formulas, because they had this family of formulas, but they didn't look alike. So I actually created and I negotiated a better licensing. I was trying to replace Peter. We had a Beatrix Potter Peter Rabbit on the label. And I proposed that we should just go to a generic rabbit, and the New York attorneys were not happy with that idea. So I took that consumer data. I actually researched that. Consumers just said, yeah, it's a nice rabbit. And so I negotiated, cut the royalty that we paid them in half. So saved several $1 million with that research. So again, it's based on, research-based decisions,
Absolutely.
And then
when you have a situation where you're paying a lot for a license that nobody recognizes, and the research says ditch it, that's just one of those things where research pays for itself really quickly, right?
Yeah. Well, even the packaging work, what we did, we went all over the country and actually did some of this actually in Asia as well. We actually just had a test kitchen, and we laid out every possible utensil you can think of, right? And it's all laid out. And then this was primarily for powdered formula. And then we'd say, okay, mom, make a bottle. We'd watch her and record it. And we'd ask her, why'd you do that? So some of the coolest insights we learned were things like, first time mom doesn't put the scoop back into the container because she's afraid she's touched it. And she's really, worried about germs at that early age. So one of the things we were trying to do was actually get rid of the scoop. And I actually had some test products that I think I could make it work. The problem was we had a plant that was pretty high tech. And for me, I had to change the entire process. Actually, we had 3 plants around the world that were using the same technology. But infant formula is like uneven particles. My laundry detergent it's more of a bead. So each bead has everything in it. So I had to learn a lot about, engineering and So I hung out with all these scientists and engineers but really trying to take that consumer learning. Even at Mead Johnson, a lot of them had different ideas about science and how the baby should perform and moms. But then I would match that up with, well, here's what's really happening. And they liked it though, because I could take their science insights, and then I would take the consumer insights and see where they match up, which is where the ARA and DHA came into play, because she really was worried about brain development, and the breast milk was really the ultimate for that brain development. But yeah, we could never, it's kind of like a North Star. We hated it. It's kind of crass when I hear it say that out in public, but internally we called it breast milk in a can. That was the goal, right? We would never get there, but that was always the goal. It's kind of our North Star, if you will. But so from there I went to, so then I was tired of big corporate life. I was not a good corporate guy. I would tell people what I really thought, which I learned later was not necessarily the best way to do that, but it works great in consulting world. So I left. I actually sold all my Bristol Myers stock while it was still high, and started my own consulting practice. And then I worked with clients like ConAgra, SlimFast, Rexall Sundown, and was able to apply really that fuzzy front end, as I like to call it, help them. So I would walk in there, and every company had done a brand equity study, an attitude and usage study, what we call an A&U. Everybody had done lots of qualitative research, but guess what? No one actually sat down and read the whole thing. So I would take all their research, the research from the last 5 years. In fact, I would love it. AI now would probably be great for this. I literally would go in there and research. I would spend 6 weeks just reading all their stuff. And then I would come back with a summary and say, here's the creative connections I'm seeing across all this research. And then from there, they would then define their hunting grounds. Very similar to how I did the modeling with at Mead Johnson at Bristol Myers Squibb, where we would take all the data and we would scrub it, and we do a post-it notes, and we would create a model up on a wall. And so I essentially was offering that to those clients. And then they would then I'd work with them on their concept development, and then we'd go out and do qualitative to refine those concepts. And then they get them we want to get them to where they call it quantitative ready. But most of the time I was spending, a lot of my time was with Bases. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bases, but it's a division of AC Nielsen. So when cable TV came out, test marketing kind of went away, live test marketing. So in fact, Evansville, Indiana was one. So those are I don't know if you ever heard of a company called Behavior Scan. So they're all behavior scan markets, like Clare, Wisconsin, Peoria, Illinois, Evansville, Indiana, Rochester, New York. They were isolated. Well, when cable TV came about, it really messed that all up. So what we did was we simulated these concepts. So I spent a lot of time getting concepts ready to, because when you do a 3-cell basis, we're talking $100,000. So you don't want to, you want to make sure you've tested the concept really well and refined it and done a communication check on the concept. And then we would, it would simulate the market. So I spent a lot of time. That's why I'm so big on business models. And I want to understand your volumetric model. Who's the customer? How many are there? How many will buy? And then how many will repeat? So it's like awareness, trial, repeat. And then you measure the repeat of the repeaters. And then you do a basis too, where you actually give them the product. And then you find out, do you have concept fulfillment? Does the product perform like they thought it would in the concept? So you're essentially simulating. And then with bases, you actually put in a marketing plan by week. So you literally put in, I'm going to drop a coupon on week 16. I'm going to run this many gross rating points on television or radio or whatever. Now you could do digital. And they would essentially, the black box would actually simulate the model. It would simulate. And it was pretty accurate. If you did a bases one, it was probably within 10%. Typically, because what they're doing is they're going back and they're looking at products that actually performed in market, and then they kind of back into the black box model based on real in-market results. Now, if you're doing something truly new to the world, like an Apple phone, iPhone, it's probably not going to test well, right? It's really meant for, I'm going to launch a product that's at least somewhat similar. You know what it's not so foreign that you've never heard of it. So I could do, I could test things like, a smoothie, which was actually a new concept back then, but at least I could describe what it was, right? So it still had some reference to the world. But if it was so innovative, really new to the world, I don't think Macy's did so hot on those concepts because it really didn't have anything to reference it. So
Yeah, and research has always been bad at being a crystal ball for new things.
Yes,
because they're so outside people's schema that they don't really know how to interpret them. And some famous research failures. I mean, one of the most famous is the show Seinfeld, which tested horribly and then went on to be one of the biggest sitcoms ever. So I can totally see that. But at the same time, as you said, if there's analogs to the market, or you can at least explain it, testing can work really well.
Well, and also new product development is always a timing game. Okay. Because there were concepts that tested poorly, like the fax machine, the answering machine. When those were first invented or thought about, the current lifestyle didn't make sense. So they would research this, and people would say, it was primarily a farming community when people would say, well, if I'm not home, they'll just call back. And so the notion of an answering machine didn't make any sense. But of course, later it did. So some of it's a timing game. Many of the products that we would retest again like 5 years later, and they would score much better because things had changed. So, lifestyles change. And so I was always fascinated by that. That was in fact, I probably should have went in market research full time because I loved really understanding that. And that's what motivated me to really be a marketer, because it's not really so much about the execution of advertising that a lot of people kind of fall in love with. They think that's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But after you've done a few ad campaigns, it's not that. I mean, I didn't think it was that fun. What free was fun was going out and spending time behind the mirror, behind the one-way mirror. And I always say I spent most of my career in the dark, because I was in a focus group, room in the back, and hearing that person going, oh, like one of the coolest insights we learned at Mead Johnson when I worked on mothers of toddlers was she's schizophrenic. And we said, okay, so after we showed you, we had this concept of the worry ball. And we said, okay, well, how big was your worry ball before you saw the concept? And they'd say like this, okay, so what did your worry ball do after you saw the concept? Oh, it went down, it went smaller. And we said, well, what would it take to eliminate your worry ball? And she said, over my dead body, you're going to take my worry ball away. And that was huge. So here we were trying to totally eliminate your worry. That's impossible. That's actually almost like you're taking my job. As a good mom. So we had this whole idea of the mommy badge, and but she's definitely schizophrenic. She wants the baby to grow up, but she doesn't. So those are huge insights. And I researched that all over the world. And I found that consistent no matter where I researched that. So those are the kind of things that once you kind of that basic understanding, that really drives a lot of things. You don't always have to go back to the customer for every little thing if you know them really well.
Yes. And I've had that experience many times myself as a researcher. And I think when you get that perspective where you suddenly start to understand this explains a lot of the actions that I'm seeing in the market, then it makes it a lot easier to start asking different questions, sometimes the right questions, because you weren't asking them right before. And then to your point, when you're in the role of having to put this all together in strategy, you can articulate it very quickly and very easily with just that quick example, as opposed to having to go through reams and reams of research to get there.
Yes, exactly. And then my consulting days, I ended up actually, because I didn't want to travel all the time. Zoom had not been invented. I would have loved Zoom. I might have stayed as a consultant. But you had to get on an airplane and go talk to the client and maybe get a project. So I started doing some smaller companies, and that's where I kind of fell in love with small business. And actually, a good friend of mine ran the Chamber of Commerce in Evansville, and it had me as a volunteer for their local small business development center. That's how I got a first exposure to that as a volunteer. But I had some smaller clients that would call me in for marketing. And this is an example where you've got to really define the bigger company strategy versus the marketing strategy. And I would say, that's great, but marketing strategy for what? I had one client in particular. I basically wrote, I could say your strategy is make anything out of metal. It was, they were primarily a company that could coat metal. And so I helped them, did that more like $100,000 McKinsey project, but only charged them 25,000. But I helped them really figure out what do we want to be when we grow up, and did a lot of what we call, I used to do a technique called cover story vision, where it's like, pick the trade magazine that you want to be on, you're on the cover. And 5 years from now, you're on the cover and you had this great success, and tell us what was it, what was it? And then you open up the magazine. Inside the magazine, there's a sidebar that kind of highlights some of the key accomplishments. So those kind of things. So I really enjoyed doing that as well. And I really loved consulting, but I was a solo practitioner, and I had a couple of virtual partners. I had a market researcher, I had a graphic designer, and I also had a facilitator. She was really more facilitator. I would love to train her as a focus group moderator. I think she'd been a great focus group moderator too. But we used to do a lot of cross-functional facilitation, both for strategic planning as well as sometimes new product. Not necessarily, I wouldn't call it new product development, more like hunting ground development, trying to find what's that bigger hunting ground. And then also sometime evaluation on concepts. We want to get people to not always work on something that's like, we're going to go to Mars, maybe we should just go to the moon, and try to find a combination of portfolio. But so I really missed people, and I missed running a team. So I ended up in healthcare. So I spent about 15 years in healthcare. My first job was a large physician group. So that's where I taught them about CRM. The CEO was a physician, and he called it compliance, patient compliance. So I just started calling it patient compliance. So what we did is we figured out when they missed their annual exam, and we would send them a mailer and said, hey, you need this, you need this. Little did I know that all that experience would help me later on help medical tech scientists do a new product development. But there I learned really it's about, again, very focused marketing. Not all marketing is, mass media. And then from there I went to Ascension, also in Evansville, Indiana. They had their local system was called St. Mary's. Now it's St. Vincent. They created a state network through all of Indiana. So a great example of that, was, we had a product called, it was a, teaching children how to eat, because they were NICU grads, and they were tube fed since birth. So we're talking really small target, right? So my analogy is it's kind of like if you had an ant going across the room, and you got this gigantic sledgehammer, and I want to kill the ant, right? Well, they actually came to me and said, we think we should do a TV ad. And I was like, wow, a TV ad. What would we talk about? Do we have a children's hospital? No. What, and then I'm drilling down, and finally they're like, well, really what we want to promote is this. And I was pretty excited because it was a team approach. It took 6 weeks to do this program, and I could get moms within a day's drive. So I did search engine marketing. I learned what are the keywords they search for. I literally spent $500 a month, and I had 55 people knocking on the door every month. It got to the point where they finally said, turn it off, because we now have a backlog. We also had a Ronald McDonald House that just got built. It's in the same parking lot. So you literally could just park your car, stay at the Ronald McDonald House, because you had to stay there for 6 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And but I teach that example, especially when it comes to digital marketing. So people want to do these ads. And then I had a doctor that came to me and said, well, he's a GI doctor. He wanted to do a billboard. And I, of course, I was new to healthcare, so I already had all the research in my full folder. I didn't tell him that. I said, so, hey, I'm new to healthcare. Tell me about your business. How do you get patients? Well, now that you mention it, about 99% of my patients come from primary care doctors. I went, really? That's fascinating. And so through this conversation, I'm asking him. So I said, so if the primary care doctor, and then I said, oh yeah, and somebody said something about what do they call? They're called an office scheduler. And when they want to do a colonoscopy, I found out that I heard that the office scheduler just wants the easy button. They just want an easy way to get it scheduled for the colonoscopy, right? It's not about some advertising right? And so I said, so what would how does the billboard, I just kind of like, hey, I'm new to marketing, I'm new to healthcare marketing, and how does the billboard going to help with these doctors? And he's like, well, that's a good point. And I quickly said, well, you know what? Now, you speak really well, and you're really, you're doing the state of the art stuff. I can pitch this to the news, and they need some news stories around the latest medical technologies. And he was all excited about that. So he wanted the billboard for his ego,
Right.
And so I quickly learned in healthcare, I had to really bring it down to marketing 101. Like, okay, who's the customer? How do we most effectively reach them? And that was probably the biggest thing that I brought to Ascension. They thought I was going to come in and do this big branding strategy. And I ended up just showing them, you're not spending enough money at the doctor's office. I said, that's like your wholesale market, right? And even your own doctors who actually work for you don't even know all the services that you are selling. And so I turned that whole thing on its head.
Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. I was just going to mention there that what you're saying is so important in terms of the vanity of advertising sometimes, especially people that are not doing it and they have a personal business or a personal practice. They want to see their faces up on billboards because they see other people doing that and they think, well, those people must be successful. But with the experience and the knowledge that you had in marketing, you're able to help pivot them to something much more effective, which is, hey, earned media is going to get you a lot more, or, being a presence in the community in other ways is going to get you a lot more than just having your face on a billboard. And by the way, that billboard is going to cost you a lot more than these other things that we're going to have to do. So I think that experience and that knowledge is really part of what makes a marketer so valuable. And especially when whether you're in a corporate role or a consultant, or you're in a managerial role, as you end up being in, you have to be able to articulate this is why we do this. This is the strategy behind it. Yeah. Well, let's, you're talking about healthcare, and that's where you and I intersected, because you were at SSM Health.
Yeah. Then I went from there that we wanted to get back to St. Louis, helping with being parents. And so I was the system director of marketing and digital, and I had a whole bunch of other titles that got too long to even say it. I covered some regional areas and also employment marketing. So, recruiting nurses, I also was over that as well. And then after SSM, I then was helping tech startups. I really missed the innovation and went back to kind of the innovation world. And I just recently retired. I'm an executive in residence at WashU, so I'm still doing some of that on a really, I hate to even call it part-time because it's about a day a week, but keeps me engaged, and I really enjoy doing that as well. So that's kind of the summary of the whole 40. It's probably up to about 42 years now.
Well, I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger there, because we're going to pick up and hear part 2 next week in a future episode of the Marketing Gateway. But I want to thank Ed Lahue for taking time to share his knowledge and expertise with us. And as you can hear, just from all the considerable things that he has gotten to do in his career, marketing is about more than just one thing. It is often about being a great communicator and taking all these different pieces and applications from the tool sets that you have and putting them into action. So you're going to get to hear even more of that in our next interview. So I'm Sean in St. Louis. This has been the Marketing Gateway. See you next time.